Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Grid Live Pre-Race covering the 60th running of the Rolex 24 Daytona. I'm Cubby Lamb from the Podium Finish, and with me, Joe Samaniego, Adam Lemerise, and sports car driver Aaron Vogel will join us later in the show. A special thank you to our Patreon supporters, Colin, Mark, Deshell, and Robin. We encourage all our viewers to take 5 minutes after today's show and consider joining our Patreon page. Also, a huge thank you to Edward Hunter from formerly E-Zone for buying us a coffee. We greatly appreciated it, and we encourage viewers to click the link in the video description below to buy a coffee for our team here at Grid Network, a one-time contribution, or buy a coffee for your favorite on-air personality. And we already have people in the chat room. Hampton Connor, thank you, Hampton, for being here to listen to our discussion about today's race. Really excited to kick off the 2022 racing season in grand fashion with the Rolex 24 Daytona, an all-star event where we see stars from the world of sports car racing here stateside in Europe. Also stars from IndyCar, NASCAR as well, and drivers who have been in Formula One. So definitely always a highly anticipated motorsports event. And before we get started, we want to send a special congratulations to Robert Wickens for finishing on the podium in the TCR class in yesterday's IMSA Michelin Pilot Challenge race. 1,258 days ago, his life changed forever in that horrifying IndyCar catch fence crash at Pocono Raceway. But Robert Wickens persevered and beat the odds to return to the one thing he loves the most, racing. Welcome back, Wiki Bobby. And Hampton also saying, let's go Jimmy Johnson and Jordan Taylor. Really rooting for those drivers in this year's Rolex 24. And now we do have a lot to discuss today. And let's start off with that intense qualifying race from last weekend.
Yes, it was a very intense qualifying race last weekend. The roar before the 24, a great battle between Ricky Taylor and Richard Westbrook and DPI, both drivers going hard for the pole position. Westbrook tried to make the pass on Taylor, exiting the banking of the trioval into turn one, but spun the number 5 Cadillac DPI, and Taylor went on to win the qualifying race and put the number 10 accurate DPI or Wayne Taylor Racing on the pole. I gotta start off with you, Adam. Was this a preview of what could potentially be the final lap of the Rolex 24 hours?
Absolutely. You know, looking up and down this lineup that we see, this is to me, the most diverse field we've had in a long, long time. So many storylines in each class, but the DPI class, there's so much driver talent in those cars. Wayne Taylor Racing is going to have a huge target on there is going to have a huge target on them since they're going for 4 straight Rolex 24 Hours Daytona. Now, to me, I don't think that's going to happen. So stick around. And we have a question from Hampton. He said, "Do you think the weather will affect the performance of the prototypes?" Yes. It's going to be cold in Florida. It's going to be cold at night around freezing. We've seen situations over the years where cars have gone in to the pit wall. So, and to see who we all picked for the Rolex 24 Hours Daytona, stick around toward the end of the show. I'll just say this. None of us are picking. One of us is picking Wayne Taylor Racing to win. Who? Find out toward the end of the show.
Yes, and Hampton, I'm actually glad you asked that question about the weather affecting the performance of the prototypes because that's something we're going to get into a little later in the program. I'm not gonna really go into detail in that right now. And you said it's snowing in North Carolina right now, so it's super cold in Florida. You bet. Yeah. The forecast in Florida is supposed to be in the highs in the 50, in like the low 50s, and then during the night it's going to get down below or close to freezing. And I know it's snowing in North Carolina because I'm in North Carolina right now. We got like 2.5 inches on the ground right now. It really came fast, and we're really excited to see a little snowfall. Really puts me in the mood for this race. The Rolex 24 And to answer the question, Joe, I think this very well could look like it could be like the final laps of the Rolex 24, and we saw last year in the closing laps. It was the battle between that Wayne Taylor Acura and the Ganassi prototype. It was very intense. Ringer Van de Zande and Felipe Albuquerque, I believe, who was behind the wheel at the end of the race during that final stint. Unfortunately, Van de Zande had that tire go down and spoil what would have been an amazing finish, but it was definitely very intense. So I would not be surprised to see what we saw last weekend with Richard Westbrook running down Ricky Taylor for the win. And I will say Richard Westbrook in his mid 40s, he hasn't lost any speed at all. Typically drivers lose a little bit of the top form they once had, but in his mid 40s, Richard Westbrook, or some call him sports car Westy, he hasn't lost any speed at all. I think he's even faster than he was before. But glad to see Westbrook back in a prototype where I feel like he belongs.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be excited to see him right there in the heat of the action. And Kobe, here's a quick follow up question from the chat room. I heard the Chevys are lacking straight line speed. Do you think they could still win in their class?
Well, I certainly think it's possible, but it's going to be an uphill battle. And unfortunately, so far this weekend, we've mostly had wet weather running, so it's been hard to understand where they are post roar before the 24 weekend. But in the only dry session we got, Corvette Racing, they were towards the bottom of the running order in the GTD Pro class, and it's really uncharacteristic to see that. And I know we're gonna go a little bit more into detail on that in just a couple of seconds. But since this is a long 24-hour endurance race, yes, it's good to have favorable balance of performance where you can go out there and be more competitive. But if it's like a race of attrition, Corvette Racing's in it. Anybody can win in the class. Uh, but if Corvette is not having a good BOP, they better hope that they're like 1 or 2 laps ahead of the car in second place. Because if it's going to come down to a late race restart and they're lacking the straight line speed, they're certainly going to be in a lot of trouble. But since this is a long race, it's anybody's game. So looking at Corvette's history overall in this particular race, never count them out, even if they are down a little bit on straight line speed.
Yeah, I would say don't count out Chevrolet Corvette, and especially such a huge field, as you mentioned, late restarts. I would be shocked if we don't have quite a good number of cautions in this race, just because it is going to be a crowded track, 61 vehicles out there. I just think it's going to be a lot of action. I will not be surprised if we get a caution within the first hour, to be honest. I think it's going to be really set the tone for what could be a chaotic 24 hours. And of course, one of the major talking points besides the large field, and this sort of is part of the big large field, is the high number of GT cars that we have in this race. We'll discuss this in greater detail, but with the addition of GTD Pro, some old GTLM teams have been merged into the field, such as the two Corvette, Rahal BMWs, and Risi Ferrari. Now, after struggling to roar for 24, the Corvettes and BMWs got a balance of power adjustment, more weight added, but changes in the aero to give the cars more straight line speed. I know we had that question in the chat room, so a little bit to answer the question right there. But still, when it comes to the racing, not 100% sure what to anticipate with this. Kobe, in sports car racing, it is not uncommon seeing sandbagging where the teams don't show their full hand. We see this in just about everywhere. For any new fans, sandbagging is where you're not pushing all of the car's potential limits because you want to save a little bit to surprise everybody on race day. So, Kobe, when it comes to that, do you expect to see some manufacturers who struggle at the roar before the 24 come alive in the 24?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's going to happen somewhat. We've seen this in years past where a certain manufacturer is not running well at all in the roar, and during the first half of the race is like they're asleep. And then when it's time for that final 2 hours of the race and they're still on the lead lap in their class, all of a sudden they show speed that we haven't seen so far during the race weekend. And sandbagging is really just a show of gamesmanship, and everybody playing mind games, and everyone is accusing all of their competitors of sandbagging, and this is really nothing new in the world of sports car racing. I still think it's too soon to tell how Corvette and the BMWs are going to do, especially with the Corvette having those special modifications to run in this GTD Pro class, and the BMW have a brand new car, so they're going to be using this as like a 24-hour test session to improve their car and make adjustments before we get to the next race at the Mobile One 12 Hours of Sebring in March.
Yeah. In Hampton, you said you live in North Carolina. Well, I also live in North Carolina, and I got a couple inches of snow here at my house, so I'm ready for the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona, just like my colleagues. And going back to your question, this GT overall field is going to it. I believe there were some GT cars sandbagging, and this the GT field is just as competitive as we see in the DPI class, LMP2 and LMP3. So much talent in these cars, and to me, even though Corvette racing was toward the back of the field in wet sessions, never count out those two cars, because those two cars are always up front, especially when it comes to overall endurance racing.
Endurance racing is the name of the game. Definitely is going to be an exciting race, and I would not be surprised to see some surprises where people that were struggling are also up front. We encourage everyone in the chat room. Who do you think was potentially sandbagging? What surprises do you see? Would love to hear your predictions, and especially when we're on the air following the race Sunday, share those predictions, see how everyone goes. And of course, later today in the show, be sure to tune around for Adam's pick a winner, see if you could get on the leaderboard as well. So we got a lot to discuss in the show, and some of the big news. A big story that broke earlier this week that was abrupt and surprising was the departure of Guy Cosmo from Gilbert Korsakoff Motorsports. On social media, Cosmo said the team owner was angry he didn't win last weekend's qualifying race despite going up against two factory drivers and being on pace with his teammate Mike Skeen. Cosmo also said in the eyes of the team owner, he lost the race, let everyone down, need to make changes because of the investment into the GTD program. Cosmo's replacement is James Davison. Kobe, starting with you. Were you surprised by Guy's departure, especially considering his performance in the row before the 24?
Yeah, I'll admit, Joe, this is definitely a strange one for me. I've never seen anything like this at all since I've been covering sports car racing. And I just want to say there's three sides to every story: Guy Cosmo's version, the team owner's version, and what really happened. And that's not to say Guy Cosmo isn't being truthful here. It's just really stunning when we got the news earlier in the week that Guy Cosmo had been essentially fired from his job because he performed so well in the Royal before the 24 qualifying race, and Guy Cosmo is a fast race car driver. He's always performed everywhere he's been, and to fire him for not winning the race, that seems kind of extreme in my opinion. And also this goes to show that something a lot of people don't really pay attention to are the ugly business dealings that happen behind the scenes in the motorsports community. Another example would that be like, remember when Zach Veach raced in the NTT IndyCar Series, bringing Gamebridge to Andretti Autosport? Zach Veach didn't perform. Andretti Autosport sacked him, but guess what? They kept his sponsor, Gamebridge. Just show you how cruel motorsports can be on the business side of things. And my next example, although it's not really a great example, DC Solar, Chip Ganassi Racing, Brennan Poole brought DC Solar to Ganassi. Brennan Poole didn't perform. Ganassi let him go, but guess what? Ganassi kept DC Solar. It just goes to show all of the ugly business dealings in motorsports, as I mentioned. And as for Guy Cosmo, he responded on social media this morning saying that considering what happened and how he was let go here, he plans to start his own racing program in the future. And for Guy Cosmo, that might be a really smart thing because he can control his own destiny when he's the boss of himself. So he don't have to worry about somebody firing him over not winning a race, which is a really strange accusation, if I do say so myself. And Hampton, yeah, in the chat room saying, do you think the NASCAR drivers will make any noise or stay at the back of the field? I said, well, this year we don't really have a large NASCAR presence at the Rolex 24 in Daytona. We only have one full-time NASCAR driver racing, and that's Austin Cindric. He's going to be driving the number 15 Mercedes AMG GT3 in the GTD Pro class for WeatherTech Racing and Proton USA. Yeah, so Cindric's the only full-time NASCAR driver, as Joe mentioned. James Davison, who ran part-time in the NASCAR Cup Series last year, going to be replacing Cosmo in the GTD class. So those are the only two drivers in the entire field that have a NASCAR presence. Surprisingly, we don't have AJ Allmendinger this year with Meyer Shank Racing. So that yeah, and also motorsports journalist Nate Ryan actually looked into this issue, wondering like, yes, we've seen a dwindling amount of NASCAR action at the Rolex 24 in recent years. I know we had Chase Elliott last year, and a couple of years ago had Kyle Busch as well, racing for Vassar Sullivan in that GTD Lexus. But Nate Ryan says that this year the reason why we don't have much NASCAR action is because of the next gen car and the amount of testing that they're doing, and the drivers want to hit the ground running when we get the 2022 NASCAR Cup Series season started. And in order to do sports cars, you need to dedicate a lot of time to this as well. And it would be very hard to fit in their schedule to try to do the Rolex 24 and and prepare with the next gen car. So maybe next year, once they get a handle on it, this season we could see more NASCAR drivers in the Rolex 24 since the style of car with the next gen is really similar to these GT3 cars. So I think it's a really good idea that Austin Cindric's going to be running that Mercedes, since the technology is going to be a lot more similar to the next gen than in recent years. And in order to run the Rolex, and also Nate Ryan's article, he spoke with the team manager Action Express, Gary Nelson, and Gary was saying that he needed the drivers to commit to doing the open test in December with the team, also doing the roar and then the race, but it was hard to find cup drivers who were available since they're so busy with next gen. So hopefully once the next gen cars develop, see more NASCAR drivers back in the future because I remember the days when we had a lot of NASCAR drivers running the Rolex 24 Daytona, and it's really seemed to have decreased a lot in recent years. So hopefully we can get back to how it used to be.
One of the things with Austin Cindric, as you mentioned, in the race, we know Austin Cindric. We saw what he could do at Circuits of America when the NASCAR Cup Series went there. I'll be really interested to follow him. And we asked everyone in the chat room, who was your favorite NASCAR driver, or which NASCAR will you like to see in the Rolex 24? And I already see we got Hampton saying Jeff Gordon. I'd love to see him race again. Of course, Jeff Gordon, he's done the Rolex 24. Many other drivers from the Cup Series have done the Rolex 24. And one of the big things, I was talking about some favorite memories, IMSA invoking some of that as well. For the new top prototype class, having a new game name beginning in 2023. Originally, it was going to be LMDH, but IMSA ultimately decided to go with a popular name from the past, Grand Touring Prototype, with most people expecting this to be the golden era of prototype racing. The GTP name fits because the 80s and 90s featured IMSA's previous golden era under the same name. Recently, Porsche was their first manufacturer to unveil their GTP car in testing, and starting in 2023, Penske Motorsports will enter GTP cars on both sides of the Atlantic in IMSA and the FIA World Endurance Championship. In order to prepare for next year, Team Penske is running the LMP2 categories in WEC this year with the newly signed factory drivers of Dane Cameron and Philippe Nasser, who will share the ride with series veteran Emmanuel Collard. And one of the big things, of course, is very exciting to see photo courtesy of Porsche Motorsports. As you can see the vehicle right there as they were testing it earlier. It looks very, very fast. And of course, All the lines are to hide the details from the competition so they don't try to get a leg up. And the Porsche GTP name, that alone will excite many sports fans that grew up watching sports car racing. Adam, what is the history of the IMSA's famous GTP category?
Well, you were mentioning you were mentioning Porsche. And back in the day, the Porsche 962Cs, they were dominant in the IMSA GTP category, and the drivers were iconic. The late great Al Holbert and his co-driver was Derek Bell from Great Britain. They drove the number 14 Lowenbrow beer Porsche 962C to multiple race wins and multiple championships. Then you had Jaguar coming over from England. First of all, they had the Group 44 racing team led by Hurley Haywood and Bob Tullius, two iconic American road racers. And as Jaguar evolved, they added some great names to those two cars as well. In the number 60 car, you had Jan Lammers from Holland and Bryce Cobb from here in the United States. Number 61 car had Davy Jones from the United States and Martin Brundle from Great Britain. In fact, those two cars were sponsored by Castrol Motor Oil. And you want to see Kyle Larson compete in the Rolex 25 Daytona Humperdinck? I agree with that. But now we switch over to a team that was really dominant, and that was Nissan. And with their ZXT turbo cars. And 1988, you had a driver from Australia who competed in Indy cars. His name was Jeff Brabham, and in 1988, his Nissan team won 8 straight IMSA GTP victories, and Jeff captured 4 straight IMSA GTP championships from 1988 to 1991. You also had Toyota from Dan Gurney's All-American Racing, and they were dominant in the early 90s after Nissan left IMSA. And their drivers were Juan Manuel Fangio III from Argentina and Rocky Moran. Now, some of the tracks they competed on they competed at the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona, the 12 Hours of Sebring. They raced on a street track in Miami, Florida, around Bicentennial Park. They also ran in Columbus, Ohio, San Antonio, Texas, the Tampa Fairgrounds in Tampa, Florida. And the season finale always took place at the Del Mar Fairgrounds in San Diego, California. And I can even say, yes, they did run at Sears Point International Raceway, Portland International Raceway in Oregon, and also Watkins Glen International in New York. In fact, in 1991, Tommy Kendall was driving a Chevrolet Intrepid GTP car, and he had a horrific accident. They didn't have the bus-stop chicane back in the day like they do now. Well, Tommy lost a wheel, and he hit the wall coming out of turn 6 very, very hard. He broke both of his legs, and it took a year for him to do rehabilitation to get back driving a race car. When I heard this news, it brought back so many memories for me and so many memories for other race fans as well that remember the iconic IMSA GTP series that ran back in the day. It's going to be awesome to see what these cars are going to sound like, look like when they hit on the track in 2024. We are about to enter a new golden age of sports car racing across the world.
Adam, I have to agree with you with everything you said. I think this is just the start of something massive when it comes to sports car racing. And we encourage everyone, especially if you're tuning in for the first time, subscribe to the Grid Network all season long. During the IMSA endurance events, we will have special pre-race programming and then the post-race part of our Grid Live wrap-up on Sundays. Be sure to subscribe right here on YouTube or Twitch. And of course, if you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, you can't miss out with all of our coverage throughout the year. And GTP wasn't the only major news we saw this week. We also learned that Ford, yes, Ford is coming to sports car racing with a factory back team in 2024. They'll be debuted the Ford Mustang GT3 at the Rolex 24. Ford Performance will work together with longtime partners Multimatic Motorsports. We plan to run a factory two-car GTD program and make the Mustang available to privateer teams in GTD. Now, one of the main test drivers for the Ford Mustang GT3 program is factory driver Joey Hand, who will be running all the NASCAR Cup Series road course events with Rick Ware Racing and Ford Performance boss Mark Rushbrook. Total Sports Car 365 Ford is evaluating a return to the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the future, with GT3 cars becoming eligible there in the coming years, including crown jewel events in the International GT Challenge, like the Bathurst 12 Hours and the 24 Hours of Spa. Now, ironically, the debut season for the GT3 in 2012 is the same year Corvette will introduce their Z06 GT3 car. Another battle of American muscle coming in 2 years. Photo courtesy of Ford Performance and Chevrolet for their respective vehicles. When it comes to essentially 2024, what do you predict 2024 will look like with Chevrolet versus Ford IMSA rivalry resuming, Kobe?
Well, I think it's going to be the start of another wonderful chapter in this wonderful rivalry between the two American manufacturers, Chevy versus Ford. And I think with GT3 cars also becoming eligible in ACO competition, that's gonna open up a lot of opportunities for Ford. Like they did with the Ford GT to race over here in America and also on the world stage as well. Although the next GT class, it's going to look really weird in 2024. We don't even know if we're going to see Corvette race in the factory team we've known as Pratt and Miller beyond the 2023 season, because Corvette racing, they do the factory program, but with the GT3 car, you're required to sell the car to customers. So the new Chevrolet Corvette that's coming online 2024, they'll have to sell it to privateers, and the factory Pratt Miller team they probably won't be allowed to race Le Mans in 2024 because the GTP cars in IMSA and the Le Mans hypercars, that's going to be the top class. Then we're expected to have LMP2 continue program lineups, and then the new GT3 category Le Mans in the future, that's expected to be pro am driver lineup. So Corvette won't be able to run their factory drivers like they used to. So I'm wondering if it could also be the start of a new era where we're going to see like other Corvette racing teams be competing. Are we going to see the current Corvette racing team in its current form fold and help support its customers? That's something we're going to have to look out for. But it's really exciting hearing that despite the rules on the world stage, that Ford is committed to running a two-car factory Mustang GTD Pro program, and also going to have some cars in the GTD class as well with program driver lineups. And Chevrolet, hopefully Corvette Racer will continue running that factory programming GTD Pro with the new Corvette. But overall, I think it's going to be very exciting watching Chevy and Ford create a new chapter in its rivalry. The history of Chevy and Ford been really special. Especially, there's a lot of exciting things happening with both Chevy and Ford with new race cars. Well, General Motors, especially with the Cadillac GTP car, coming along in the next generation. The new NASCAR next gen Cup car, and Ford has a lot of new things happening as well. Not only are they bringing the Mustang to GT3, they're also going to be updating their Ford Mustang GT4, getting a brand new model there. Also, you mentioned the next gen car, and also they have a brand new Mustang down under in Repco Supercars Championship. So if you're a Chevy or a Ford fan, there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Kobe. And this rivalry continues once more. Um, you'll be pulling for the Blue Oval of the Ford, or you'll be pulling for the Bowtie Brigade. That is Chevrolet. And when I heard this news, it's like, wow, we are entering a golden age of motorsports and sports car racing throughout the world. Uh, Now with the new Chevy Corvette in 2024, the new Ford Mustang GT3, uh, you're gonna have and like you mentioned, Kobe, with the Gen 3 cars in the Repco Supercar series, with the Ford Mustang and the Chevrolet Camaro, I can say the Repco Supercar drivers absolutely love these cars. They've been out there at Queensland Raceway in Australia testing, and uh, it's going to be exciting. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be diverse. There's no words to describe it. The rivalry continues between the Bowtie Brigade, that is Chevrolet, and the Blue Oval, known as Ford.
Yes, and we asked in the chat room Ford versus Chevy, what do people predict in the 2024? Who could be ahead? Hampton goes with the bow ties. We encourage everyone to participate in the chat rooms, as I know a lot of excitement for the future of sports car racing, and of course the classes ahead. And also Humperdinck, for a favorite track in the GTP era, I had to say the old school Road Atlanta. Definitely
Yes, I'll agree with
Road
that.
Atlanta.
Humperdinck easily, easily.
Yes, we encourage everyone to keep sharing your questions, memories, and predictions in the chat room because we're pretty much covering everything about this race. And one of the big things, of course, the classes. Kobe, what can you tell us, especially this year with so many vehicles? 61 cars still boggles my mind. 61 cars at Daytona.
Yeah, before we get a little bit into class, I also wanted to share a little bit of news that happened yesterday, showing a sign of unity between IMSA and the ACO in the World Endurance Championship. As you know, on the backstretch of Daytona, what they've been calling the bus stop for years, they gave it a name. They're gonna call that the Le Mans Chicane. You know, giving tribute to the 24 hours of Le Mans. And in return, at Circuit de la Sarthe in France, the first chicane on the high-speed Mulsanne Straight is going to be named the Daytona Chicane. So paying tribute to IMSA and the history of Daytona across the pond in France, and we're going to be doing the same over here with the bus stop becoming the Le Mans Chicane. So definitely really exciting to see where we are with IMSA and the ACO's partnership moving forward. And featuring Hampton says that the favorite track, the Charlotte Roval, because you've seen it in person. I've also been to Charlotte, covered 2 years of NASCAR races there at the Roval. Really exciting track. Be really exciting to see IMSA come back and race at Charlotte Motor Speedway, the Roval, and put it on the schedule. I know during the COVID year, when they needed to fill in a race, the IMSA GT classes raced at the Roval. It was at night in the rain, really really messy, really wet. It was like a monsoon out there, but hopefully if they decide to come back in the future, it'll be dry and we'll get to see a great race at the Charlotte Roval, especially if we see the GTP prototypes. Definitely bring back a lot of memories for fans with the prototypes under that name. And get into classes. We have a large field this year, as Joe mentioned. 61 cars among all five classes. Another all-star field with drivers with experience in Formula One, Formula E, NASCAR, IndyCar, Le Mans, and looking at the field breakdown, we're in DPI, 7 cars, 10 in LMP2, 9 in LMP3. 13 in GTD Pro, and 22 in GTD. Starting with DPI, another year of strong driver lineups. Chip Ganassi Racing adding another Cadillac to their stable. IndyCar champions Scott Dixon, Alex Palou, and Sebastian Bourdais team up with Ringer van der Zande in the 01, the same car that was fighting for the overall win last year in the closing stages, until a puncture put them out of contention. Another good group of fast drivers in the sister car, the 02. Earl Bamber from Porsche, Alex Lynn from Formula E, Kevin Magnussen moving over to this car, and IndyCar driver Marcus Ericsson's making his Rolex 24 and sports car racing debut. Other Cadillac teams, JDC Miller Motorsports, we mentioned Richard Westbrook's strong performance in the qualifying race, and they should also be strong in the Rolex 24 as well. Last year's champions, the number 31 Whelen Engineering team from Action Express Racing, Felipe Nasr, left the team to become a Porsche factory driver. Replacing him is former Mazda DPI driver Tristan Nunez, who will compete alongside Pippo Durrani and Mike Conway in the second Action Express Cadillac, sponsored by Ally and a special partnership with Hendrick Motorsports. You have Jimmy Johnson, Kamui Kobayashi, and Mike Rockenfeller back in that 48, replacing Meyer Shank Racing bound driver Simon Pagenaud in the lineup. Kobayashi's Toyota Gazoo Racing teammate from the FIA World Endurance Championship, Jose Maria Lopez. Then you have the two Acuras, last year's overall race winners, Wayne Taylor Racing, looking to go 4 in a row in the Rolex 24. Last but not least, Meyer Shank Racing. After a disappointing 2021 season, there's a lot of new things happening over there, starting with Oliver Jarvis from Mazda and Tom Blomqvist from Formula E running the whole season. MSR IndyCar drivers Elio Castroneves and Simon Pagenaud complete the number 60 lineup. And Hampton in the chat room says GTD because of Corvette. Thank you for sharing that, Hampton. We encourage all of our viewers to continue commenting and asking your question in the chat room, and we'll do our best to display it on the screen and answer any questions you may have. And this question is for you, Adam. In your opinion, which DPI entry will be the greatest threat to ending Wayne Taylor Racing's dominance at the Rolex 24? It's really crazy to see how dominant Wayne Taylor Racing is, because it's so competitive nowadays, and the go for 4 in a row to get 4 in a row, that would be an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, it would be, Kobe. But like I said in the beginning, Wayne Taylor Racing has a huge target on their back. And you take a look at this DPI lineup. It is so diverse. It's hard to pick a winner. But we will at the end of the show. But I gotta say, that 01 car is looking for a rebound after what happened last year. And that lineup, oh boy, you have 3 iconic IndyCar names, especially with the 2021 NTT IndyCar Series champion Alex Palou. The 02, just as good. Wayne Taylor Racing, their 4 driver lineup, they're fast. They're really fast. You mentioned Richard Westbrook's team. He's still going strong at his age, and I say congratulations. But to me, it's hard to say. All 7 of the DPI cars have so much driver talent across the board. But if I had to choose one car that I think will go ahead and compete alongside Wayne Taylor Racing, it has to be the JDC Miller Motorsports team. We saw what happened at the row before the 24 on the last lap between Richard Westbrook and Ricky Taylor. You don't think Richard Westbrook wants to wear a Rolex? And don't count out the number 60 Meyer Shank Racing with Helio Castroneves. He won his 4th career Indy 500 title last year, and he's competing full-time this year in the NTT IndyCar Series. How cool would it be to start off his racing season wearing a Rolex? And his teammate Simon Pagenaud wearing a Rolex when the NTT IndyCar Series rolls in St. Petersburg in a short amount of time.
Yeah, there's so many great driver lineups in DPI. Obviously, Wayne Taylor Racing, how they performed last year, and their speed that they've shown in the Roar, and also also race weekend as well. They're definitely going to be the favorites to try to get that four in a row overall victories. But looking at all throughout the DPI field, have a lot of strong driver lineups. You mentioned Meyer Shank Racing. Actually, the Express got two strong lineups as well. JDC Miller Motorsports, they've been doing an excellent job really building up that program to be more competitive. But I think the one team you have to look at is the two car Cadillac DPI team. One of them Action, I mean not Action Express, but Chip Ganassi Racing. I think it's gonna look similar to last year, where we're gonna have Wayne Taylor and Chip Ganassi going at it in the closing stages of the race. I mean, just look at the Ganassi Cadillac DPI lineup. In the '01, you got Ringer Van de Zande, who's one of the fastest in the class. Sebastian Bourdais, who's leaving IndyCar behind, switching to sports cars full time. Do you have two other IndyCar champions, Scott Dixon, Alex Palou? That is an all-star lineup, and then the other cars fast as well. Two former F1 drivers, Kevin Magnussen, Marcus Ericsson, Alex Lynn, who spent the last couple of years in Formula E, and Earl Bamber, who left as a Porsche factory driver to get this opportunity with General Motors. I think Ganassi is stacked in both of those lineups. I think if I had to pick one team to take down Wayne Taylor Racing in their dominance here, it definitely has to be Chip Ganassi Racing, with especially with all of their support from the factory. It should be really exciting to see those teams go to battle in just a short amount of time. And in LMP2, once again, a mix of American and European WC teams competing against each other. From WC, we have High Class Racing, United Autosports, Racing Team Nederland, and G Drive Racing taking on IMSA's LMP2 teams. Last year, LMP2 champions PR1 Matheson Motorsports in the field with Ben Keaton and Mikkel Jensen. And a fun fact about Ben Keaton, the amateur driver, he's going to be pulling double duty. That's not really a surprise for Ben Keaton pulling double duty, but he's going to be making his DPI debut with JDC Miller Motorsports, and Ben Keaton is known as to be one of the world's fastest amateur drivers. So it would not be surprising to see Ben Keaton right on pace with the professional DPI drivers. And winners of LMP2 class last year at Daytona, Aaron Motorsports is going to be bringing back the same driver lineup. And of course, lots of competition in LMP2 and LMP3. Yeah, looking at some of the LMP3 class teams, the ones to watch, looking for a Rolex watch, Andretti Autosport, Core Autosport, Raleigh Motorsports, and more. And between the two classes, there's actually a lot of hype surrounding one team, Dragon Speed, and their drivers. Jordan bronze rated driver Eric Lux. Three drivers are sharing that car from the NTT IndyCar Series. Rookie Devlin DeFrancesco and two of IndyCar's brightest young superstars, Pato Ward and Colton Herta. Adam, is the Dragon Speed prototype the car to beat in LMP2?
Yeah, and you won't, and it won't be hard. And if you look at their paint scheme, it won't be hard to notice them, especially at night. Uh, but LMP2 is also so diverse, and you know, if I had to choose one team that I think who could really go out there, I'm going to have to say the number 11 PR1 Matheson Motorsports car, and that driver lineup is stout. You have Jonathan Bomberito and Herrick Ticknell, two world class sports car drivers, Stephen Thomas and Josh Pearson. I think number 11 PR1 Matheson Motorsports car will be a team to look out for. But you mentioned Dragon Speed. That driver lineup is stout. It is stout beyond recognition. Eric Lux, he's good. And those three IndyCar drivers with him, I could see that team actually having a top 10 overall finish at, tomorrow when we end the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. So I'm going to have to say the PR1 Matson Motorsports team will be up there competing with Dragon Speed USA. It's going to be so diverse. And if you're not, and I hope you'll find a way to roster this Rolex 24 Hours Daytona. This will go, I believe, to me, this will go down as one of the most iconic 24 Hours of Daytona we've seen in recent memory.
And it's funny when you say that, Adam, because it seems like every year we keep saying this is going to be the greatest Rolex 24 in history. This is going to be the most iconic race that we've seen so far. And it's true. It seems like just every year it gets better and better and better. And looking at everything in LMP2, those driver lineups are stacked. I know you say you can see them finishing in the top 10 overall. I'm going to do a few places better since there's only 7 DPIs. You know, a couple of them run into issues. We could see it. We could definitely see an LMP2 car finish in the top 5 overall. And I know this unlikely to happen if all of the DPIs have major issues. Can you imagine it, having one of those LMP2 cars winning overall? I know we already saw this happen before. I know Joe talked about the first LMP2 car to win overall at Daytona a little later in our program. But I think Dragon Speed's lineup definitely one of the best in LMP2. Also, some really great lineups as well. You mentioned Pierre One Mathis and Motorsports, that 11 entry. You got the gentleman driver, Stephen Thomas, who was very fast last year with Win Autosport. Josh Pearson, the youngest driver in the field, only a young teenager. And then you had the two former Mazda factory drivers, Harry Tinknell, Jonathan Bomarito in the entry as well. A really strong lineup. Like Aaron Motorsport won last year. Dwight Merriman, Kyle Tilley, Ryan Dial, and Paul Luke Chating, really strong as well. And then we have some really strong teams from the WEC, United Autosports, Racing Team Nederland, who has IndyCar driver Renus VK, and PR1 Matheson Motorsports also has a second entry. The team that won the championship last year, Ben Keaton, Mikkel Jensen, Scott Huffaker, and Nicholas Lapierre. Then G Drive has 2 entries as well with really strong drivers. So LMP2 is definitely going to be a class to watch. There's a lot of drivers that can win, but I think Dragon Speed certainly has one of the best lineups, especially since I got 3 IndyCar drivers in one team. And coming up shortly, we have Aaron Vogel joining the discussion on the GT classes from a driver's perspective. For the meantime, looking at GTD, you have your usual suspect like Turner Motorsport with the new BMW M4 GT3, last year's Rolex 24 GTD class winning team Winward Racing, but they have a different driver lineup this year. Cedar Racing from Italy ran a Dallara in LMP2 last year, but this year they're in a GTD Ferrari. Magnus Racing switching from Acura to Aston Martin. Wright Motorsports returns with Porsche and another great mix of drivers after retirement of Patrick Long. The Heart of Racing Aston Martin and Vassar Sullivan Lexus have cars in both GTD and GTD Pro. Speaking of GTD Pro, which is replacing GTLM with GT3 machinery, we have 13 cars, 8 different manufacturers. KCMG from Hong Kong and FAF Motorsports. They're going to be running those factory Porsches. WeatherTech Racing bringing a Porsche as well, but 2 Mercedes on the side, which includes Team Penske NASCAR driver Austin Cindric in the number 15. He's the only full-time NASCAR driver in the show this year. A Lamborghini from TR3 Racing, 2 factory BMW M4 GT3s from Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. Vassar Sullivan and Harder Racing putting together some strong all-pro lineups, and starting with the Vassar Sullivan Lexus number 14 in GTD Pro, Jack Hawksworth, Ben Barnacote, and IndyCar rookie Kyle Kirkwood, while Ross Gunn, Alex Riberas, and Maxime Martin shared a number 23 Aston Martin, a prancing horse. The number 62 Risi Competizione Ferrari returns to Daytona with James Collado, Alessandro Perguidi, Daniel Serra, and Davide Rigon. And then you have the iconic pair of Corvette Racing C8Rs with special modifications to run with the other GT3 cars, of course. A Corvette GT3 car is coming online in just 2 years' time in 2024. People say we're entering a golden era of prototype racing, well, a new golden era. But can the same be said about GT racing and IMSA in a post GTLM world?
That I think is going to be really interesting. I feel when it comes to what's happening with GTP, LMDH. That's gonna bring the fans to the tracks, attention to the motorsport of sport car racing. That is going to be a win for GT racing, of course, overall, because now you got more fans getting invested into sports car racing, learning about the GT racing, and so on. And I think it's going to be a win for everyone. The big thing, of course, is when it comes to essentially some of the rules, some of the different technicalities. The last thing they want to do is make it where it's a little bit hard for the teams to compete in each side and all that. And I think overall, there is the potential of seeing essentially the golden era of sports car racing, not just for the prototype, but for all of sports car racing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Joe. Right now we are truly entering a golden age of sports car racing. We mentioned Ford Mustang GT3, and we mentioned Chevrolet Corvette. It's gonna, and, and of course, IMSA's GTP category. And Hampton said, "I can't wait for the 24." Hampton, I'm right there with you, my friend, and we thank you for commenting. You know, during our pre-race coverage, we truly do appreciate it. It's going to be truly a golden age of overall sports car racing. I can't wait to see how the new Ford Mustang GT3 does. I can't wait to see how the new Chevy Corvette does on track. And overall, it's going to be truly an iconic golden age of sports car racing starting in just a couple years' time.
Yeah, I think it's certainly going to be a special time in sports car racing for the years to come. And I'm sure a lot of people were kind of worried what GT racing was going to look like, especially with all of the exciting announcement we were seeing in Le Mans Hypercar and GTP, wondering if all of the factory focus was going to go to the top class, and then GT would, kind of become a thing of the past. But this year shows that GT is alive and well, and that there's always going to be a place for this style of racing, whether or not you have all those factory programs going for the overall win. I still think we'll see manufacturers commit to GT3 racing, especially looking at how popular GT3 is all around the world, especially in races like the 24 Hours of Spa, the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, Bathurst 12-hour, all of those endurance races where you have GT3 cars going overall for the win. And also, you have GT World Challenge, America, Europe, Asia, Australia, and also DTM's using GT3 cars right now. So I definitely feel like the future is bright there. And Hampton says you think it will be a golden age. The time is right. Totally agree with you, Hampton. Seems like there's a lot of positive momentum on the prototype and GT front, and seeing 13 GTD Pro cars. Looking at those driver lineup, absolutely stacked, and then the GTD cars as well, with some wonderful driver lineups. I have a feeling that it's only going to get better, and I'm wondering what the lot of prototypes expected for next year's Rolex 24. I'm wondering if they're going to try to figure out a ways to get a bigger pit lane, or we're gonna have to do have like a qualifying session and have people like D&Q, because I have a feeling they're gonna have to turn away a lot of entries, because if we have 61 cars now, and we're expecting to have over 10 prototypes next year in GTP and Le Mans Hypercar potentially coming over, and then if you want to add in LMP2 to LMP3 classes, and also keep if we kept the numbers the same with the GT classes, like what are we gonna do next year? Because oh, if space was an issue, I have a feeling we'd see 70 or 80 cars in this race.
70 to 80 cars. That's going to be insane. I mean, but it just shows this is something where it is going to be a special age for sports car racing. Now, one of the questions for you, Kobe, heard a rumor Corvette has the Corvette has sandbags. Do you believe that could be potentially true?
Oh yeah, I believe it could be potentially true. But just to be fair, I think everybody sandbags to a certain extent, because everyone doesn't want to show their true hand. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen this in the past where a car won't do anything all weekend, and then when it's like the under final 6 hours of the race, be like, here they come. Where did all this speed come from? Yeah. So I feel like sandbagging, has always been a part of sports car racing and always will be because these teams are always trying to do what they can to get a leg up on the competition. So yeah, it would not surprise me if Corvette Racing or all the other teams have been sandbagging.
Yeah, and then we got another question from Hassan. Do you prefer the old qualifying session system or this quote new type of session, not the Friday quali? And then also regards from South France, have a good one, guys. Enjoy. Thank you for tuning in from France. Hope you're having good warm weather compared to our colleagues in North Carolina. But I think when it comes to the qualifying questions, I'm more of a traditionalist. I prefer the old one. Kobe, where do you stand?
Oh yeah, I feel the exact same, Joe. It was really nice this year to see the qualifying race be more competitive because last year it seemed like everybody just took it easy, wanting to get that car in one piece to the Rolex 24. And I understand that. Although this year's qualifying race was, really exciting, a lot of hard racing. I could go with that in the future. I'd rather just have a regular qualifying session so we can just move on to the race.
I'll agree with that, Kobe. I'm a traditionalist as well. I like the old qualifying style format, and and we thank you for tuning in from South France. France is a well-known country with a lot of motorsports history, so we thank you for watching. It's going to be hope you'll in hope you'll be with us on a wrap-up show tomorrow as we recap the Rolex 24 Hours Daytona, and plus we have coverage of both Formula E races, the season opener from Saudi Arabia as well.
Yes, indeed. Be sure to subscribe right here to the Grid Network. A lot of program for sports car fans all throughout 2022. And of course, we're on Twitch and other streams. But if you're joining us right here on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and that bell icon so you get a notification when we go on the air. We go on the air multiple times a week. And one of the big things, this is the 60th anniversary of the Great Endurance Race. Some of the most memorable moments of the race after the 50th running and the entire decade ago will start in 2013. We had the final Rolex 24 under the Grand Am umbrella. Then we had the merger between Grand Am and the American Le Mans Series the following year. So, of course, where sport car racing had those two series, now it's all merged together. And seeing the teams from both paddocks come together under one united roof, that was a great sight to see. And of course, we all knew this could be the start of something big. Boy, well, I agree, it has been. The one thing, though, we didn't want to see in 2014 a very scary crash. Mimo Gidley crashing hard into the back of the Risi Ferrari and suffering several injuries. Luckily, he was able to get back to racing and resume his passion of motorsports. That year, we also saw a massive 67 car field for the debut of the IMSA and in its current form. During that time period, we saw IMSA balance the old Daytona prototype with the LMP2s. Then in 2016, the LMP2 car won the Rolex 24 Hours for the first time. Extreme Speed Motorsports, sponsored by Tequila Patron, in a Honda powered prototype. That was a very great livery day they had, and I believe Scott Sharrow, a former IndyCar racer, was part of that effort as well. This was really a major coming out party as well for the defending IMSA DPI champion, Pipo Derani. This race pretty much put him on the map, and we also saw a photo finish in GTLM between the two Corvettes. And then 2017 kicked off the DPI era and the beginning of the Wayne Taylor dominance. That's where we saw essentially them winning 4 out of the last 5 Rolex 24 hours. And Hampton says 30 minutes till the green. We'll be wrapping up right so as the green flag takes off, you'll be ready to go and enjoy the race. And then Jeff Gordon, he got a popular win with Wayne Taylor Racing in 2016. 2 years later, Fernando Alonso, a Rolex 24 Hours win with Wayne Taylor Racing. Kamui Kobayashi drove a spectacular for the team in 2019 and 20. And then, of course, we saw last year a memorable battle in the final minutes between Chip Ganassi Racing and Wayne Taylor Racing in the prototypes. Those are just some of the memories leading up from the past 60 years. And guys, I gotta be honest, I think we're gonna have a lot more memories created for the next 60 years and beyond. Starting with you, Kobe, what's your favorite Rolex 24 hours in the last decade? Where do you see this event heading for the next decade?
Well, my favorite Rolex 24 moment in the last decade was 2014. Obviously, IMSA IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship in its current form. When Grand Am and the American Le Mans Series merged, we saw the best teams from Grand Am and also the best teams from the American Le Mans Series all unite under one roof. Yeah, and I remember how it was, seeing the American Le Mans Series GT class merge, become GTLM on the high banks of Daytona. It was kind of strange at first because I wasn't used to that. And then at Sebring, seeing Daytona prototypes at Sebring and running Petit Le Mans, that was an odd side as well. But it was just great seeing everybody finally get united after being split apart for so many years. I remember that we had drivers who used to race in both series, and then once they became then once the series merged, they had to decide what they were going to do, which team they were going to race for, because one driver would race a Daytona prototype in Grand Am and then run the GT class in the American Le Mans Series. So overall, without the merger, we would not be here today. And if the merger never happened, sports car racing would be a lot weaker here in the United States. But I think that merger was the best thing to happen for sports car racing in North America, especially how we got here from Daytona prototype LMP2 to DPI, now to GTP and Le Mans Hypercar. I think the future is going to be really, really exciting. Expect another golden era prototype racing with GTP, lots of manufacturers, lots of world class drivers from all around the field. In GT, I think it's going to be very strong, as I previously mentioned. So I think sky's the limit for IMSA sports car racing. I think the popularity is going to go up by a lot in the coming years.
And for me, you mentioned Jeff Gordon competing with Wayne Taylor Racing and winning the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. After everything that Jeff Gordon accomplished in his career, starting driving sprint cars in USAC and midgets, Silver Crown, they went on to compete in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, back then called the Busch Series. And then Rick Hendrick gave him a shot in the number 24 DuPont Chevrolet. And the rest is history. How dominant was he in that car? Well, I think to me, a cherry on top is when he won with Wayne Taylor Racing at the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. He can say he's done it all, even though he hasn't competed it at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Still, he can say he won the iconic Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. And that's something a lot of NASCAR drivers cannot say that they did.
Next, we have a driver spotlight from a competitor in GT World Challenge America. GRIDnet Network welcomes back Aaron Vogel to share her insight and analysis. Erin, thank you for joining us again to kick off the 2022 racing season.
Hey, Kobe. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you back here. And as you saw, we just talked about the large number of GT cars in this year's Rolex 24 at Daytona between the GTD Pro and GTD classes. IMSA decided to keep the BOP the same in both GT classes versus giving GTD Pro cars more horsepower to get them closer to old GTLM performance levels. As a GT driver yourself with experience in the GT3 machinery, particularly the Mercedes AMG, do you think IMSA made the right move here?
I do. I think it was a good call to keep the BOP the same. Theoretically, with the teams being weighted heavily towards, more experienced pro drivers or young up and comers who are very quick. I think that having the same BOP, you're still going to see the field kind of filter out into the GTD Pro and the GTD. And I think it's going to kind of line up naturally. on its own. Obviously, with a 24-hour race, the field's gonna get quite mixed up. But I think it'll be an interesting chance to see the difference between a pro team versus a team that has some amateur drivers in it. And I think it'll be very interesting to see the comparison between those two classes in essentially the same machinery. I personally find that it kind of makes it exciting. But then, of course, I've done a lot of spec racing, and so I enjoyed that element of racing.
Yes, it's certainly going to be interesting to see how all of this shapes up. And without performance gaps between GTD Pro and GTD cars being non-existent, the difference is really going to come down to those driver lineups. And in GTD Pro, you'll see some of the fastest GT factory drivers in the world, and mostly all pro driver lineups. And while I say mostly all pro, Cooper McNeil's going to be pulling double duty in the GTD Pro class in the number 79 WeatherTech Porsche, and also the number 97 WeatherTech Mercedes. And in GTD, the regular class right there, you have the Pro Am lineups unchanged from last year's format. And in the qualifying race last week, and we saw some of the typical names from the old GTLM class like Corvette Racing, Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan, and the Risi Competizione Ferrari. All of those teams you saw in GTLM, they weren't even a factor at all in the GTD Pro class. But that was just a qualifying race, a sprint race, and like you were saying, Aaron, about over the span of 24-hour race, is probably going to shape up where we're going to see the GTD Pro cars ahead in the running order over the GTD cars, because not a lot of time had passed during the qualifying race last weekend, and the All Pro lineups in GTD Pro, they didn't really run away at all from those Pro-Am lineups. We saw a real good mix of GTD Pro and GTD cars mixed together in the results. So here's my question for you. Could there be bragging rights for GTD Pro-Am drivers to beat the big-time factory drivers in GTD Pro throughout the season? How challenging is it for the FI-rated bronze and silver drivers against the golds and platinums, although they won't be directly competing against them?
Yeah, and I think it just depends a bit on the drivers, Kobe. And, I think it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I think, the factory teams are certainly going to do everything they can to put the very best drivers in the car so that they can show their factory prowess. None of them were going to want to be beat by, certainly not by a non-factory effort, and absolutely not by cars that have AMs in them. But I will say, as an amateur driver myself, that I know that there are some extremely competent, extremely experienced amateur drivers in this field this weekend that, could surprise a lot of people. So, I mean, I don't think we're going to see, I don't think it's going to be a black and white separation between the classes. I think there will be some mixing of the perhaps less experienced GTD Pro teams with some of the more experienced GTD teams, especially if you see some of these teams who have drivers that have worked together for more than one season and through many of these races, like Russell Ward, Philip Ellis, and Michael Grenier come to mind. They've raced in that Mercedes AMG now for in a couple of different series for at least a year. So there will be some very experienced teams that know their cars very well in the GTD class that could run quite high up in the field, intermixed in with the GTD Pro teams. But I think we'll definitely see really strong efforts by the factory teams to keep themselves in the front running of the field, to try to keep their nose clean and put in a perfect race.
Yes, it's good. I'm sure it's going to be exciting for everybody watching to see how the factory GTD Pro teams compete against those Pro-Am driver lineups. And also, I'm really interested in seeing how Corvette Race and Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan, those new BMWs M4 GT3s and the Risi Ferrari, those teams is fun TLM. I want to see how to do it more competition, especially against those more experienced GTD teams you mentioned, like Vassar Sullivan stepping up, the harder racing Aston Martin, teams who are used to this GT3 machinery versus the teams who are not used to it, especially we're not used to seeing Risi running the GT3 version of the Ferrari, used to see them running the GTLM version Corvette. They had to modify their car to a special spec so they could race against these GTD cars. And BMWs are brand new, and the Ray Hall team hasn't had much experience with this car yet. And something else we're going to be following. There's quite a challenge in multi-class sports car racing with the differences of speed in all the classes, especially with the prototypes, the much faster prototypes overtaking GT cars. And we've seen GT drivers very frustrated with prototype drivers and vice versa because of the level of aggression and lack of awareness in traffic. This year, 61 cars, over half of the field, that's going to consist of GT3 machinery. So it'll be a bit more challenging for the prototypes this year in traffic, having to overtake that many cars. So, how can the drivers do their best to take care of each other, knowing the speed difference with a field of this size?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see with such a large GTD field, GT3 field. And I think, it takes a lot of cooperation and awareness. I think the pro drivers in both the GTD and the GTD pro classes are probably all fairly experienced with that kind of speed differential and with making cooperative passes. I think there may be some of the less experienced drivers and both just young drivers and amateur drivers who might struggle with that a little more, although if they've raced here before, then they're familiar with it. But yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of traffic out there. It's a huge field, and everybody's going to have to be really heads up, really aware. I think, the weather could play a big difference. If it rains again, that really always mixes things up. It just makes it hard to see if there's spray. So it's just, it comes down to being cooperative and understanding that, that everybody's racing out there. And being aware of, having good communication with your team and being aware of where you are in the field and what's coming, having good spotters and having good people on the radio to help filter out that traffic with such a large field. So I think it will be very interesting to see how the traffic all works out. I'm looking forward to spectating the race for that very reason.
Yes, and it really seems like the major key to this race is going to be awareness, 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 especially if we're not going to see a race of attrition where we're going to have a lot of cars dropping out. And nowadays, these cars are so sophisticated and it's a lot easier to get a handle on developing these cars. I don't really expect to see a lot of attrition unless we just see one of those really wacky races where we're seeing cars retire from the race left and right. So I totally agree with everything you were saying. It's gonna be interesting watching those prototypes slicing and dicing through traffic. I know you're gonna have to be watching. I know GT drivers gonna be watching in the mirrors, and it's something that drivers don't really like, which we really see a lot in this style of racing. Flashing the lights, especially at night, when prototype drivers will be flashed on the high banks, letting GTD Pro and GTD drivers know that they're going to be coming behind them, and that driver needs to be paying attention because the worst thing you want to do is be exiting NASCAR 4 and a prototype's coming on your right and you jump off to the right to try to pass somebody. That can cause a really nasty accident. So awareness is definitely one of the biggest things to pay attention to. And also you mentioned the weather, and this year's Rolex 24 could actually be one of the coldest Rolex 24s on record, and that's something these teams are not used to seeing in nice old sunny Florida. And we're gonna have to watch the cold tire situation. If all of you viewers out there remember what happened at Le Mans, it was an unusually cold Petit Le Mans in November, and and we saw some of the major championship contenders sliding off track because it was much colder than they anticipated. Trying to warm cold tires in extremely cold conditions is going to be really tough. So I think in the early morning hours when it's expected to be at or below freezing, we're going to have to pay attention to what's happening on the racetrack because drivers exiting the pits, we could see them having a small off into the grass or even a big off that could cost them that iconic Rolex watch. And Aaron, we want to thank you for giving our viewers excellent insight as always, and we can't wait to hear what your racing plans are for 2022. And when we know, we'll be sure to report it here at Grid Network.
Thank you so much again for having me, Kobe. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
And now it's now time for Pick a Winner. And we take a look at our leaderboard here. We see Kobe, Joe, and our colleague Ed Hunter all with one. So now it's time we make our pick for this iconic and spectacular Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. Erin, I'll start with you. At the end of 24 hours, who brings home this iconic race and gets to wear a priceless Rolex watch?
Well, personally, I would still really like to see one of the Acuras win again this year. So I think I'll be rooting for Meyer-Shank this season. And I hope they have a clean and easy race, and I'd like to see Acura come out on top.
I think the team that let it get away last year with the tire puncher, Chip Ganassi Racing, the number 01 is going to win this year's Rolex 24. It's going to be a big celebration for Ringer Van der Zande, Sebastian Bourdais, Scott Dixon, and Alex Palou, who's making his Rolex 24 debut.
I'm going to go with a team that's going to go for 4 in a row, and they're going to make it 4 in a row today. Wayne Taylor Racing, the number 10, they are going to win the Rolex 24 Hours.
Those are all solid picks. But I said, like I said, Wayne Taylor Racing has a target on their back. When it's all said and done, I'm going with the number 60, Meyer-Shank Racing. I'm going with the number 60, Meyer-Shank Racing car. That driver lineup is stout, especially when you have a 4-time Indy 500 champion like Helio Castroneves, and of course his teammate Sabin Pagenaud. And I gotta say, Kobe Earth, it was a hard choice for me to pick a winner. It was either going to be your choice or my choice. So I'm glad I went with my choice. Joe, that was a good pick. But Wayne Taylor Racing has to get beat sometime.
Yes, it's really going to be interesting to see how this race shapes up. And before we go off the air today and into our special IMSA program, we'd like to remind all of our viewers out there to like and subscribe to GRIDnet Network here on YouTube. We're actually just past 300 subscribers, so if you're brand new here and like what you see, hit that like and subscribe button, because I'm sure there's a lot more content that you'll enjoy here at GRIDnet Network. And you can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We encourage you to take 5 minutes after our show and consider joining our Patreon. Invest in GRIDnet Network to keep us on the air well into the future. Click the link in the video description below, and you can buy a coffee for your favorite on-air talent here at GRIDnet Network. Once again, big thank you to Edward Hunter from Formula E Zone for supporting us, buying us a coffee. You can also buy a coffee Aaron Vogel as well for being so generous with her time, coming on our show to provide her insight and analysis for all our viewers watching around the world. Any amount will help us continue growing our motorsports media outlet. Visit public.com, also known as the stock market social media home. The link and referral code below gives you $5 to invest immediately. Public.com will allow you to connect with your friends. You can make new friends and use tools to learn how to properly invest in the stock market. Television coverage at Daytona begins in almost 10 minutes time at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on NBC. Green flag at 1:40. Most of the race will be able to be viewed on USA Network, then return into NBC for the final 2 hours. However, the entire race is going to be streamed online on Peacock tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. Join us for Grid Live wrap up 90 minutes after the checker flag falls on the Rolex 24. We'll also have a full recap of both Formula E races in Saudi Arabia. With that said, for Joe Samaniego, Adam Lemerise, and Aaron Vogel, I'm Kobe Lambeth from the Podium Finish. Thank you for watching and enjoy the 60th running of the Rolex 24 at Daytona.
Don't be an anonymous investor. Join the stock market social media platform, public.com. Invest any amount of money and share with friends and new friends. Discover new opportunities, such as new companies and potential business partners, and useful tools for beginners, and share your experience with friends on public.com. Link in the video description gets you $5 for being a Grid Network viewer. Use the referral code GRIDnet for your free $5 to invest and start investing and networking on public.com.